Hello, YouTube. Once in a while, I bring your attention to the stories and ideas of Sergei, who had worked in the Russian space program and maybe still working. He seems to be an engineer and a programmer, and he graduated from the prestigious Majaysky Academy, where some of the top scientists, military scientists for the Soviet Russian space program graduate from, and not only there, also some of the future military spies and other specialists. He's a very intelligent person and he has a wry sense of humor, but I'm curious about the areas that he writes about. I think there is something to it. Today I'll tell you about his ideas about hybrids and chimeras. Very interesting. And he started with hybrids a few years ago. And he said that the ancient Greeks were very creative people, and their myths and legends sometimes described very strange creatures. Many of these creatures combine the wildness of nature and the intelligence of people, which made these creatures a powerful ally for humans, well, or a mortal enemy. Were they myths? Maybe the Greeks described some real things. Maybe all these monsters had some real prototypes. So he wanted to say, to think about who the hybrids of ancient Greece could actually be, and started with the Gorgons. They were three terrified-looking sisters. They had wide faces and piercing eyes, and in some images you can even see dilating nostrils, yellowed fangs, and protruding tongues. Their heads were wrapped in snakes, and one glance of the Gorgon easily turned a person into stone. The ancient Greek hero Perseus killed Medusa, one of the sisters. He beheaded the monster by looking at its reflection in his shield. Thus it became clear that the direct gaze of the Gorgon was able to turn a person into a stone. Well, how did the Gorgon manage to do it? Most likely we're talking about some kind of technology that, with the help of invisible rays, allowed remotely sublimating a living body, depriving it of water. Perhaps some kind of energy field is capable of remotely splitting water into molecules, and the human body was instantly mummified. Remember, the snakes about the Gorgon's heads, they're not snakes at all, and most likely some cables that powered the power plant. And the tongue and yellowed fangs are resonators that generated a field of certain configuration. And then we come to the Dryads. They were forest nymphs. It was believed that the Dryads were born from trees and possessed many of their traits. While the parent tree was growing and developing, its nymph was also growing. However, when a tree died, its child died too. Dryads were usually very shy creatures. Who could these creatures really be? It can be assumed, and that here we are talking about living organisms connected but some kind of symbiosis. In this case, for example, Dryads could be genetically arranged in such a way that they ate the bark and juice of only a certain tree, because they simply did not assimilate other substances, and the death of the tree feeding them inevitably caused the death of the creature associated with it. The question of how a tree could give birth to a completely human-like creature remains open. Let us recall, however, that in the famous manuscript The Lord of the Rings, some trees could well have human qualities. So maybe trees and people can somehow be evolutionarily related. Then comes the Manticore. This animal is very interesting in its appearance. It was first described by the Greek physician Ctesias in one of his memoirs. The author claimed to have seen the animal during his travels in India. Ctesias wrote that the Manticore had the head of a man, the body of a lion, and the tail of a scorpion. Legend has it that it had 3 rows of sharp teeth, and the tail could shoot poisonous spikes, which made it possible to paralyze and kill prey. The Manticore devoured its prey whole, and it did not leave any clothes, bones, or military equipment after the meal. Everything was going to be eaten. It was going to work, he said, Sergei. What kind of beast was that? It was probably some kind of artificially created organism, the fruit of experiments by geneticists and surgeons. It is also possible that the Manticore wasn't really a living thing, and it was an ordinary robot that absorbed any matter, annihilating it in its reactor. This can explain the complete absence of material objects after eating. And then comes the Minotaur. It is believed that the Minotaur was a man, and he ate other people. He had a head like a bull, and the body was human. King Minos hid the Minotaur in a special maze, and he used it to frighten his enemies. Legend has it that the Minotaur was created it was created to punish King Minos from a poorly performed sacrifice. So, and he made Pasiphae, Minos' wife, fall in love with a white bull. As a result of this difficult act of love, a Minotaur was born. But in the end, the Greek hero Theseus killed this vile entity during one of his adventures. In fact, here we're talking about real fiction. While it does not work out to imagine the process during which it doesn't work out to imagine the process during which the Minotaur was conceived. Therefore, says Sergei, we will assume that in this place we're really talking about a legend and nothing more. But I want to talk about another Russian and his very interesting writings. And I'm talking about Ivan Yefremov, and you can find my videos about this very unusual human being, if this is who he was. You can find it in my videos, but remember the book I keep telling you about, Thais of Athens. Yefremov described her sojourn in one of the strangest temples on the face of the planet at that time, and the experiments that were being conducted in the dungeons of the temple. And he is vague about the details, but I think what happened with the conceiving of Minotaur took place there, and it's a very unusual description, and I think it points out also to genetic experiments. Read the book. You will not put it down. Let's move on to the Centaurs. Kentavros in Greek, Kentaur in Russian. These creatures were the most civilized of all the hybrid races, but at the same time, which is often characteristic of intelligent people, they were lovers of alcohol, and it was the frequent and unrestrained libations that plunged the once great people into a wild state. Centaurs had a human head, arms, and torso, and the lower part of their body was from a horse. This is why the expression drinks like a horse arose, at least in some Slavic languages. The most famous centaur was Chiron. His description contrasts strongly with the typical depiction of centaurs. Chiron had a high intelligence and good medical skills. Centaurs are most likely aliens from some other star systems, Sergei says. This can explain their weakness for alcoholic beverages and 6 limbs. Ancient history is full of myths that modern science has tried to destroy. However, in fact, mythological creatures, despite their unreality, sometimes have right to life even within the framework of science. And then Sergei wanted to talk about chimeras a few years after his hybrid creatures ruminations. So he goes on. Today we'll talk about such creatures. These are chimeras. In ancient myths, this was the name of monsters consisting of parts of the bodies of different creatures united into one body. You can immediately recall the Sphinx, which had a human head and the body of a lion, mermaids, half women, half fish, centaurs, people with the body of a horse, and a Minotaur, which had the head of a bull and the body of a man. Of course, he says these are fictional creatures. This is understandable. However, science has suddenly discovered the existence of certain chimeras in reality, and moreover, explain their existence. And that's what we're going to talk about today. A bit of mythology. The very first chimera. Legends say that the inhabitants of the Lycian kingdom, a mountainous region with fertile valleys, once located on the territory of the present-day Turkey, lived in fear of frequent attacks by chimera, a bloodthirsty three-headed beast spewing fire from its mouth. It had a lion's head in front, a goat's head protruded from the middle of its body, and the back of the monster was a long tail ending in the head of a formidable snake. King Iobates wisely ruled Lycia, but all attempts by the monarch to destroy the chimera ended in failure. And then one day, a young warrior named Bellerophon appeared before the king with the letters of recommendations from King Proteus, the son-in-law of Iobates. Respecting the commands of the gods, the king gave a hospitable reception to the guest before opening the letters that the guest brought with him. When Iobates read them, he found, to his great chagrin, that Proteus was ordering him to kill the messenger. Sadness darkened the king's face, for he had already shown his hospitality to Bellerophon, and if he ordered him to be killed, he would thereby offend the great Zeus, the patron god of the guests. So Iobates pondered this problem all night and finally found a way to avoid the wrath of God and his son-in-law at the same time. He called Bellerophon and asked him to help kill the chimera, thinking that, like many other warriors, he would fail in battle. The brave Bellerophon agreed to this without hesitation, but before leaving to hunt for the chimera, he used so-called cheat codes. He prayed to the goddess Athena, asking her for protection. The goddess heard his pleas and gave him Pegasus, a winged horse, to help him in a dangerous event. Thanks to such invaluable help, the hero killed the chimera and returned victorious. The grateful king spared his life and offered him one of his daughters as a wife.